Hello, welcome back to the Transfer Portal CFB YouTube and podcast series presented by NoContextCFB. Thank you for tuning in. This is our Week 12 recap episode. My name is Dan Keegan. Joining me today is Brian Olson. We're here to talk a little bit of college football. Brian, on paper, it looked like this week was kind of the calm before the storm, you know? There were some good games on the schedule, but a lot of big point spreads, a lot of heavy favorites, just trying to take care of business. We did get, one massive upset, and some of the other contenders mostly played with their food. How did you enjoy the week, Brian?
Yeah, it was an interesting weekend of college football for sure. We had a lot of like you said, it seemed to be kind of more of just the comfort of some kind of a chalk weekend. Nothing really. I mean, we had a couple of big games. Obviously, UCLA and USC were probably the biggest matchup of the week.
Yep.
When College Game Day decides to go to the FCS, it's probably not the best slate of the weekend of the year. But yeah, it ended up being anything but. I mean, it was an incredible weekend of college football for sure.
One of the things that made it so incredible was that gigantic upset in Columbia, South Carolina. That's where we're going to go ahead and start. Shane Beamer, that team just went supernova for 4 hours. They were unbelievable. They ran it up on number 5 Tennessee. I think the final was 63-38. A little bit of a win-loss there for the Gamecocks. Taking Tennessee out of the playoff, but maybe putting Clemson back in. They might not end up being happy about that. But hey, give it up for Spencer Rattler, right? He was one of the most ballyhooed transfers of this season. He had kind of fallen short of expectations, especially in league play. I think he had more interceptions and touchdowns in league play, I believe. At the start of this game, at least at one point a week or two ago. But anyway, he was incredible, 6 touchdowns on the night. Brian, what stood out from this game for you?
Yeah, I mean, obviously just the performance of Spencer Rattler and South Carolina. I mean, they put it on Tennessee. I think that first quarter, Tennessee went down to South Carolina, went down and drove down the field and scored a touchdown immediately at the start. And then Tennessee I think it was like 3 or 4 plays, answered back and tied it. And
right.
You kind of figured, oh, wow, we might have a barn burner here. We might have, a back and forth matchup. And then, I mean, South Carolina just hunkered down defensively. And Tennessee couldn't stop a nosebleed last night. It was just an incredible performance by South Carolina's offense. And we kind of, when Spencer Rattler decided to join South Carolina, we kind of were curious to see what exactly would that entail? What would that be? What would that look like for Shane Beamer's team? They kind of showed flashes of last year, but they started 4 different quarterbacks last year. So,
yeah.
With Spencer Rattler and everything that he brings to the table and his talent, we're interested to see what would happen. And it just hadn't materialized for South Carolina. They were basically blanked by Georgia. They had a late touchdown in garbage time, to score 7 there. They were obliterated last weekend by Florida. I mean, that offense was just horrendous last weekend at Florida. So you expected more of the same here, this week, and that it was anything but. I mean, South Carolina put it on them, and we saw what kind of offense they could run. And unfortunately for Spencer Rattler, time is running out for him, but he showed that the flashes that he showed when he was a Heisman favorite going into 2021. But yeah, it was an incredible performance by them for sure.
That was part of it that was really impressive. Of course, the on-field stuff, but we were talking about getting obliterated last week by Florida. They really did a great job getting off the mat because that was an ugly, ugly game. But for Tennessee, I mean, their pass defense, they were kind of waiting for somebody to do this. They were, Florida had a big game against them in the air, but that was a lot of that was in a losing effort, kind of catch up, and garbage time effort. Bryce Young, of course, picked them apart, but kind of the story of that day was Tennessee's monumental win. You guys, your Georgia Bulldogs, had that huge first half of the air, but then, the second half, again, it kind of, so this Tennessee defense was not playing well in the back end, but it was kind of skating by, and then it all kind of collapsed this week. So that's tough. You have to wonder about for Tennessee if I mean, this is a couple years down the line, but if this is their ceiling, 9-3, 10-2, that's great. But did they get so good so fast that their fans aren't going to be able to handle only being 9-3, 10-2? This is not the most rational fan base in college football. We'll see. We'll cross that bridge when it comes to it. Maybe they end up, building a 12-0 type juggernaut. But
yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. It's interesting to see. The bar is definitely high, and it reminds me a lot of, and I say this about Florida as well, and which I kind of don't want to say this about Florida because obviously they're one of Georgia's biggest rivals, but right. They were able to Georgia, when Kirby Smart joined the program, they weren't very good. I mean, they lost 5 games in Kirby Smart's first season with a loss to Vanderbilt at home. So it wasn't and then they bounced back the next year and go to the national championship game and damn near win the game with, if it wasn't for Tua Tagovailoa heroics late in the game. They're national champions in the second year of the Kirby Smart era, and here we are 7 years later, and they are national champions now. And they're the best team in the country so far. So I kind of see Tennessee, I kind of see Florida, and kind of that light to see new coaching staff, kind of getting their recruiting under their belt, see what they can do. And Tennessee is definitely ahead of the they're ahead of schedule so far. And when it reminds me of Georgia as well, is that after that 2017 season with Georgia, and then went to the national championship game, you're like, you kind of expect that to be the norm now, but you got to remember this is a rebuilding program, after Mark Richt, and it's you kind of expect it there. Like you said, they kind of got good too fast, and Georgia went 3 or 4 years before making the playoffs again, and you kind of started getting a little anxious there. At least I did as a fan. I was like, well, like, hey, wait a minute, we saw where we can go. Why aren't we getting there again?
Right.
So I see Tennessee in that light, Florida in that light. Can they continue? Obviously, Florida struggled wildly this year. They started off pretty good, and they kind of fallen off a cliff pretty severely. But you give these coaches, a full couple of years in recruiting and a couple of years to build these programs, and what's going to happen? What's going to happen? So I don't think Tennessee is out of it. I don't think they're done. I don't think this is their ceiling, per se. I mean, they have a historic year with Hendon Hooker, but yeah, what's next? You have to kind of build on that. It reminds me, and also we saw what Florida did a couple years ago with Kyle Trask and Kyle Pitts, were on the verge of a playoff berth and before losing to Alabama, and then they kind of fell off the cliff from there. That was their ceiling, at least. That version of the Florida Gators was their ceiling, and they haven't reached anything near that. So there are a couple different ways it can go.
Yeah, and ultimately it comes down to recruiting and hitting on those on star quarterbacks for Tennessee. That'll be crucial if Nico's the real deal for them. But hey, we could talk nitty gritty SEC football for the whole night. Let's move out west, because there was a huge game on the West Coast. USC, UCLA, one of the best uniform matchups in college football. Yeah. It just looks beautiful on your TV screen in the magic of high definition. But this was a great game on paper, and it absolutely lived up to the hype. These teams were throwing big plays, throwing haymakers. Both quarterbacks were unbelievable. Did you get to watch much of this game, and what did you take away from it?
Yeah, no, I did. I mean, it was I was fortunate enough to be home, and I was able to watch that game. And it's anything. I mean, it's everything we expected. It was going to be an offensive, battle. I mean, it was going to be offense, nothing but offense. Both teams are very, very, very good offensively, and they can put points on the board. And it's peak Pac-12 football. Yeah. And that's exactly what we got. I mean, both teams were just throwing haymakers as well. It was kind of what I expected from South Carolina and Tennessee. These two offenses going at it. But man, that was it was tough to catch your breath watching that game. And Caleb Williams, I mean, what can you say about Caleb Williams? I think after this week, and after kind of things have happened to some of other Heisman contenders, like Hendon Hooker and Bo Nix kind of took a step back a couple of weeks, with their loss last week.
Right.
You're kind of pretty much seeing Caleb Williams solidify himself in the Heisman race, maybe even the favorite at this point.
I was going to ask. Do you think this clinches Caleb for the Heisman for you or for the voters?
I don't know if it clinches the Heisman. I think there's still, you still have 2 weeks to go. Ohio State still has a big game against Michigan next week, and we have to see how CJ Stroud, plays next week.
Sure.
And obviously we have championship weekend coming up as well. So I think there's a lot of football left to be played, and we're going to have to see what's going to happen. But yeah, it's going to be very interesting.
Williams does get Notre Dame this week, and nothing impresses the old school college football media voting. A big performance against Notre Dame. It sounds like somebody.
I got a little visitor. Oh, okay.
Howdy.
Hello.
But yeah, I mean, great job. And when you draw that through line there for Lincoln Riley out there out west and Brian Kelly down in the Bayou, both teams, have their teams in the conference championship game in year one, kind of resetting the expectations about in the transfer portal what a year one for a coach can look like. Obviously, we just talked about tenure. Some are rebuilds, and some schools are going to really shorten those rebuilds if they can be aggressive in the portal. So it'll be interesting to see how, as guys get hired, Auburn, Nebraska, of course, all these big jobs open. How do the coaches attack? Do they kind of slow play it like Billy Napier? Billy Napier said all summer, we got to build depth. We don't have that great of a roster. And then you have guys like Kelly and Riley going, no, we're going to compete this year.
Yeah.
So just something interesting, a macro storyline going forward. So, yeah.
No, yeah, you're absolutely right. It's just more of the culture of the coaching staff, what they decide to do.
Sure.
We've seen both, and you can argue that either path works. I mean, we've seen both paths work. We saw what USC's, they kind of, Lincoln Riley, like you said, they kind of cut the rebuild and they brought in all this talent and it works for them. And we've seen the slow burns as well. So no, you're absolutely right. And they both work. So we'll have to see. It's definitely interesting to see what happens moving forward.
And hey, Williams was great. I don't want to shortchange DTR because he was incredible as well. He was also
with a broken hand as well. I think he had broken. Yeah, so that was very gritty of him for sure.
But Williams, he just takes my breath away. He makes incredible plays. And a DC native like myself, so I always root for him. So let's go down to Texas and Baylor. This is here in the noon slate. Another fantastic game. TCU continuing their high wire act through the Big 12. It's a good league this year. It's a deep league. And TCU, if they can emerge unscathed, that'd be really impressive to me. They have one more regular season game, Iowa State next week. And then, of course, the championship game. Baylor, they were motivated as hell. They're a physical team. They're built in the trench, and they look like they might have an edge in the trenches in this game. And remember, TCU blew out Baylor last year. That first game after Patterson was fired with the interim Jerry Kill, and TCU really took it to him in a dream season for Baylor. So Baylor was kind of going for that revenge, trying to bring it back, knock TCU off in their dream season. But Max Duggan, he was incredible, led that clutch drive late. So what a game. Any takeaways from there for you?
Yeah, I mean, that was incredible. It was funny in our transfer portal group chat. One of our good guys, Doug's, he put it perfectly. How does TCU keep getting away with this? And they have all year. They continue to just kind of, and you almost feel like it's gonna happen, right? You almost feel like they're never out of it, and that's what makes them scary. I mentioned this last week in our recap pod last week, is that them being in these close games, they don't fold, they don't panic, they continue to battle and they continue to play, and they are battle tested, and they continue to prove that. And that drive by late in the game, and that gutsy call on 3rd and 7, they just had to run the ball with 20 seconds left and no timeouts. The clock is running. They bring the field goal team on the field and kick the field goal at the last second as time expires to win. I mean, that was a gutsy play by Sonny Dykes. And it looked chaotic, and he even said it in his press conference that it's more chaotic. It's less chaotic than it looks.
Yeah.
Because we practiced this. We were prepared for this. These Mayday kind of transfers of offenses of teams, and it's man, it was a lot of fun, and I you saw that, and good for Max Duggan to kind of. There was that play, that 2-point conversion when they came back and tied the game. They scored trying to tie the game. He missed. I forgot the receiver, but he missed. I think it was a running back. He missed a running back wide open. He would have walked into the end zone. He kind of put a little bit too much on it, threw a little bit in front of him. He wasn't able to get it, and they ended up being down by 2. And then like I said, you could easily fold at that moment and take the loss at that point, but they didn't. The defense came out, took as little time as possible, forced a 3 and out, and then Max Duggan got a chance to get a one last at bat. And it's TCU is one of those teams you can't give them another at bat. Great baseball players, you give them another pitch, you give them another chance,
right?
They're going to make you pay. Another kind of same with a baseball analogy. You've seen sometimes, you're a baseball fan, so you know exactly what I'm talking about, where a hitter will foul the ball off. He'll foul it in foul territory. The outfielder drops it in foul territory. So instead of catching it, they drop it. He gets another, and then the very next pitch, they hit a home run or they hit a base hit or something like that. And you can't give good hitters another opportunity of free pitches, and you can't give good teams like TCU free drives. You need to close these teams out, and when you don't close this team out, that's exactly what happened. So shout out to TCU and Max Duggan. And look, we need to put Max Duggan in the Heisman conversation as well. His numbers aren't Caleb Williams, C.J. Stroud numbers, Hendon Hooker numbers, but he wins, and he's a winner, and he's tough, and he's gritty. So good for him. Yeah. I'm all on the TCU train. I really hope they continue this and make the playoff. I think it's a hell of a story for them.
They're unbelievable. Just and Duggan and what he's been through on campus. He's been there for a couple of years and lost his job, got it back, all kinds of ups and downs. So the interesting to me was they had a couple injuries in that game. On that final drive, their 2 best skill position guys, Kendra Miller, the running back, and Quentin Johnston, unbelievable receiver that they have. Both of those guys were out on that drive. So it'd be interesting to see. Hopefully those guys are healthy for their next couple games, because there's some big ones coming up for the Frogs. And that'll be interesting, because they're a physical team. That's a tough league, and they haven't had a bye week since week 3. Their bye week was September 17th. So hopefully they can close it out. They've been closing out games all year. Hopefully they can close out this season, because like you said, they're a ton of fun. But speaking of teams that are a little banged up, Ohio State and Michigan both kind of ended up playing with their food a little bit. Michigan hosting Illinois, Ohio State at Maryland, and both teams did get the win, setting up next week a colossal 11-0 game. But it does kind of suck that it might come down to health for these 2 teams. Blake Corum, Michigan's outstanding Heisman candidate running back, got hurt, and they weren't the same without him. And of course, Ohio State's been dealing with all these injuries all year. Trevion Henderson, Jackson Smith, and Jigba. So kind of a bummer to see that. But did you get to watch much of these games? Any takeaways on how these 2 teams looked and getting ready for next week? Or just kind of maybe they were both in look-ahead spots and getting ready for the season-defining game?
Yeah, I think that's the latter is exactly right. Okay. I think that both teams, kind of were looking ahead of the big matchup next week between Ohio State and Michigan, and kind of maybe weren't 100% prepared for their matchups this week. But I mean, they, I think especially Michigan, Illinois. I mean, Illinois has shown flashes this year. They've shown that they're decent, but they're not. They shouldn't have struggled against Illinois the way they did, and they were this close of losing that game. So yeah, it was. Both teams showed that they can. And at the same look, I hate to. I've never understood punishing these teams for having these gritty wins, because they shouldn't be penalized for winning in these types of games. I mean, I think that they should. It shows that they can they have resilience and they resiliency, and they're able to hunker down and win this football games. And Maryland too. I mean, Maryland, what they were able to do, I think Maryland, obviously with being at home, they kind of had a little bit of an edge there. It's so hard to win on the road in college football. It doesn't matter who you are. Tennessee is epitome of that. They're 7-0 at home and 2-2 on the road. I think it was something like that. But anyway, yeah. So both of those teams, they played really good, decent football teams, and they didn't play their best games. I do think that they both were kind of looking forward to next week.
Probably.
Michigan kind of looked a little bit worse. Ohio State still put up 43 points. They were able to score the ball. They were able to move the ball. They were more par for the course. Maryland just played a hell of a game as well, defensively. They were able to come up with stops when they needed them, but Ohio State was the better team. With Michigan and Illinois, 19 points. I mean, at home against an Illinois team who's shown flashes, have been ranked, but they're not, they shouldn't be competing with Michigan, especially at home. Michigan had to come back and score 9 points in the fourth quarter to win that game. And so it's interesting to see what's going to happen next week. I do think both of them is just the victims of looking ahead to next week, and it's going to make it interesting for sure. Tennessee losing kind of takes a little wind out of the sails of that matchup next week, because I think either way, no matter who wins, they both should still be ranked in the top 4, in my opinion, depending on how the game goes.
Probably.
But I mean, both teams just, I think they were just a little bit victims of the moment and looking forward to next week, and they wanted to kind of move on and get ready for this big matchup next week.
Yeah, I would be worried about Michigan if Corum is out for this week.
Mm-hmm.
Donovan Edwards, our backup, he's a nice back, and he's got some good numbers on the year when he's had his chances. And of course, they have a great line. They have a great culture there offensively, but their offense definitely took a step back without Corum, and they had some issues finishing drives. I think they had to kick 5 field goals in this game. So you're going to need 7s to beat Ohio State, not 3. So that's an iconic. Hopefully that'll be a game that meets expectations, and we'll remember it for decades, because the table is set for that kind of game.
Yeah, it's better when both teams are good as well. I mean, the last couple of years both teams have been decent, and now they're both perennial playoff contenders. So it makes the game even much better.
Yeah, that'll be great. Let's take a minute to step away from some of those big storylines. Neither of our teams played really impactful games. Yours more than mine. But let's do a little Homer corner and talk about our teams. Because, like I said, we could go all night about Mizzou and Georgia. And this is a national podcast. We're going to cover all the bases here. So Missouri, we have one more for bowl eligibility. Got Arkansas next week. Luther Burden was incredible. We, took New Mexico State, beat them pretty easily. So that's what you got to do in week 12 in SoCon Saturday in the SEC. So get right game. So Missouri actually celebrated senior night this week instead of next week because of the game is on Black Friday. So, the holiday and travel. And so do it this week, make it easier for families and things to be there to support the seniors. So Missouri, we got one of the coolest senior night celebrations. That rock, the white rock M on the hill there at the stadium, all the seniors all get to go take a rock and take it home, a little mantelpiece and the personal trophy case kind of thing. So I don't know, just a neat tradition. Got to see that. Always get a little emotional at Missouri senior night. So but you guys escaped against Kentucky. What were your takeaways from your game?
Yeah, escaped is the right word. I mean, just didn't look sharp at all. I mean, 16 points is it's not what you want to see. They only scored 1 touchdown. I'll get to it. I'm going to get to a little bit more my disappointing thing of the week, and I guess I'll get into it now. Why not, right? The most disappointing thing I saw this weekend was the Georgia offensive line. You had first and goal at the 1 and they didn't score. They got stuffed. Just anything that was less than 3 yards to go, and they were running the ball. They would not move. They would not be able to move the line of scrimmage whatsoever. And they've kind of shown those lapses in ability all year. They've been able to protect Stetson Bennett pretty well, but at the same time, Stetson Bennett has had some plays where he's had to scramble and move around the pocket and try to make something happen. And, it hasn't been the dominant offensive line that we've seen in the past. Obviously, with Matt Luke leaving, and the last two offensive line coaches were Sam Pittman and Coach Luke, and they both, obviously we know what Sam Pittman is, and Coach Luke decided to retire for randomly. That was a little weird, but so I think the offensive line isn't as strong as it used to be, and it definitely showed this weekend, and that was very disappointing to see when you have a stable of running backs the way Georgia does with Kenny McIntosh and Kendall Milton, and Brian, a lot of talent in the backfield. Some of our freshmen too are really, really good. You have to be able to protect, and you have to be able to show that. And it's interesting though, because Kenny McIntosh had his best career game with 143 yards and a touchdown rushing the ball, but still, it's not what you want to see out of the number one team in the country. It'll be interesting. And we have Georgia Tech at home for the first time in 3 years. Obviously, the 2020 matchup was canceled because of COVID, so we haven't played Georgia Tech at home in a while. I'm sure it's going to be electric to play your rival at home and can kind of beat them up a little bit before we get to the SEC championship game.
Kirby hates those nerds, right? You guys will take it to him, right?
Yeah. He's not very kind to Georgia Tech at all. I mean, he lost to them his first year, and I don't think it's been close. I think it's been 30 plus ever since, the margin of victory. So
did he lose to them a lot as a player or something?
I don't know. I don't know. I think Vanderbilt.
Didn't he play during the peak of the Spurrier era? So he's kind of like, he's getting it back.
Yeah, probably. I'm sure, Georgia, him being a Georgia alum, probably he knows what Georgia Tech means to Georgia. So I'm sure he resonates that to the players. So, and the one thing to know is that if you cross Kirby Smart, he'll make you pay. Vanderbilt learned the hard way when they decided to, in that 2020 season, that Vanderbilt decided to cancel our game for our senior night. It was our senior night, and they decided to cancel. Vanderbilt decided not to cancel the game and then not show up. And then the very next year, we beat them 63-0 at their home field. So Kirby Smart does not play lightly if you decide to piss him off, for sure.
All right, so let's move into our kind of round robin topics, like we we're talking about. Brian, what was the most surprising thing from the weekend for you?
For me, was the top four teams struggling a little bit. All four playoff teams currently did not play their best games. We just talked about Georgia. We just talked about Ohio State and Michigan, and TCU. All four of them needed, TCU, Michigan, and Ohio State were on the brink of losing. And that would have been 2007 all over again if all three of those teams ended up losing their football games. That would have been insane content. I kind of wish it happened, because that would have given us insane content to talk about. But they were able to bounce back, and even Georgia too. I mean, Georgia didn't look sharp at all. None of the four teams really had resounding victories, and in the eve of the last Saturday of the regular season. So it was definitely interesting. And you can even, if you even want to go a little bit further back, obviously Tennessee lost. LSU played UAB at home, so I mean that wasn't really a story. But USC they almost lost as well. So 6 of the top 7 teams could have easily lost their football games. So it was an interesting weekend for sure. I'm sure all of those teams were kind of looking ahead a little bit. That was the most surprising thing for me.
Yeah, it's interesting. If you're a coach in those kind of games, obviously USC and TCU had games against peers.
Yeah.
But if you're playing at South Carolina or Illinois at home, if you're a coach, you want to use that as kind of a get right opportunity. You want to sharpen up for these coming days, and these teams didn't necessarily do that. So it'd be interesting if this portends disaster over the coming 2 weeks of playoff shakeouts. So
Yeah, we'll
I'll be
see.
interested in this for sure. So for me, the most surprising thing is, it's got to be South Carolina's offense. Who saw that coming? But
Yeah.
we already talked about that earlier. So I'm going to go to, it was a really cool week for Service Academy football.
Yeah.
All 3 FBS academies got big wins. Army upset bowl eligible UConn, and Navy took down top 25 UCF, and Air Force got a win over their in-state rival Colorado State. And so 3 big wins by all 3. Combined completed passes for the 3 wins, 0. So just perfect Service Academy football week. Navy's John Marshall had 4 sacks. He was the Walter Camp Defensive Player of the Week. Air Force Brad Roberts, second straight 1,300 rushing yard season. First in school history to do that. So just a great week for those of us that enjoy Service Academy football.
These service academies are pesky, man.
Fun to watch, man. Marshall had a Service Academy like a game. They had a 10-minute game-winning drive in their game against Georgia Southern. They got the ball back on a pick with 11 minutes left, and for 10 minutes, just yard by yard by yard, and turned it over on downs with 18 seconds left in the game. They salted it away. So anyway, I love that. So
yeah, that was fun.
All right, let's take a look at what was the most disappointing thing. You gave us a little spoiler earlier.
Like I said, I kind of touched about it. I talked about it a little bit. Georgia's offensive line. I mean, it was, you can't do that as the number 1 team in the country. You can't do that. You have to be able to control the line of scrimmage. That's where the football games are won and lost, is in the trenches. You got to be able to, protect the quarterback and open up the running lanes. And unfortunately for Georgia's offensive line, they didn't do that. And it's not the sight you want to see when you're gearing up for, an SEC championship game against LSU, who have a, pretty good front. And obviously we know what Harold Perkins can do and stuff like that. And, not to skip ahead, obviously we need to beat Georgia Tech as well. That's kind of the problem that some of these teams have, was looking ahead. But you got to be able to do that. And then once you get to the playoff, you're going to be facing very, very good defenses, a very good front. So I think that's the one thing about every college football team who's good and who has a chance to win a national championship, is you have to have a good front on both sides of the ball. And, if Georgia cannot allow that to happen again, I'm sure Kirby Smart and company will be able to get that thing right. And the good news is you have maybe a month between the championship game and your bowl game, and in this instance, the playoffs. So a lot of time to get right for sure.
Yeah. Some of that maybe was, maybe a note of consolation for you. Kentucky does have a really good front seven.
Yeah.
They were getting a lot of their linebacker room healthy too. I think all those guys were back this week. So I don't know. Yeah, you're right. It's not what you want to see heading into these collisions of agile beef that are coming in January. Yeah. But they're still good.
Yeah. They're still good. Yeah.
For me, my most disappointing thing would be ECU and Holton Ahlers there. He's been a group of 5 mainstay. He's an ECU legend. I think he's been with head coach Mike Houston that entire tenure since Houston got there from James Madison after his FCS title. Ahlers is awesome. He's been one of the best players, 10,000 passing yards, one of the best players in school history. But he's also been really up and down through his 5 years there. He'll have some amazing games. He'll also lay some eggs. So this was his senior night, 5-year career, legendary career, and really wanted to see him have a good night and wrap it up in front of those home fans there. And they the team just couldn't get off the mat, and only 1 touchdown. So just kind of bummed out for ECU and for Ahlers, and kind of sad to see it kind of end that way. So I think they're still bowl eligible. So maybe one more last chance to write another chapter in the Holton Ahlers, Mike Houston, ECU Pirates chapter. So
yeah, you never want to
just bum me
go out. So with that taste in your mouth, you always want to go out with a good performance, especially if it's the last time you play football. It means a little bit more for some of these guys when they're not playing football again. So yeah.
Brian, let's move around. Who was a player that most stood out to you this weekend?
I mean, we talked about it earlier. I mean, Spencer Rattler. It's the Spencer Rattler you've been looking for 2 years essentially. After that 2020 season, like I said, the accolades were there. He was a Heisman favorite. He was a consensus number one overall pick. Projected going into that next draft, and he kind of just never could get back to that, and lost his job, and he's had an up and down year. But to see what he did last night is incredible against a very, very good Tennessee team. Bryce Young didn't do that to Tennessee. So to see what they did, to see what Spencer Rattler did to that Tennessee defense was, 30 of 37, 438 yards, 6 touchdowns. He was just slicing that defense up, man. I love shout out to 2019 LSU for kind of really using that celebration. I love it. I don't know what it is about that celebration. I love it.
Counting the fingers.
Counting the fingers. Yeah, counting the fingers. I love that. It's a fun, very subtle celebration. It's not over the top. I love it. But yeah, no, Spencer Rattler, shout out to him. He showed he kind of put himself back on the map as one of the better college quarterbacks this season. I don't know I think he's a senior this year. I don't know what his eligibility looks like. I know after COVID and everything, he
has one more year.
So he does have one more year. Great.
He could come back if he wanted to.
If he wanted to, I don't see why he wouldn't. If you can kind of get one more year under your belt and have more of those types of performances, you can really propel back into that conversation you had a couple years ago. But yeah, shout out Spencer Rattler. It was an amazing performance. I had a lot of fun watching. I've never saw myself cheer for South Carolina, but I was a Gamecock last night, seeing them dice up Tennessee for sure.
Dude, that stadium, especially at night, it's incredible. Oh, man. I was cooking.
Yeah, when they do Sandstorm, Sandstorm is it gives me goose. That's college football. College football traditions are the best in sports. They give me goosebumps every single time. I love Sandstorm. I love Sandstorm even more when there's 10 fans remaining and Georgia's up 63-10, and they're still doing it. But that was electric. That was really, really fun. Did you see the controversy about that, by the way? That kind of sidebar. Apparently, ESPN, they're calling. I saw it on Twitter today. They're calling out ESPN because ESPN, a lot of these networks, they like to broadcast the crowd before the game to hype everything up. They do the jump around at Wisconsin and some
Enter Sandman.
Enter Sandman. Yeah, they do all those things. They show these things on TV to kind of set the mood. So they were doing that yesterday for Sandstorm at South Carolina, and you can hear Tennessee's band playing over the song, over the music, and the broadcasters the broadcast mentioned it, like, oh, the Tennessee band is drying out the noise, and then somebody commented under, like, this is posted a video of what it was like to be in the stadium, and you couldn't even hear the band. And apparently, so ESPN had a microphone up by the Tennessee band to kind of, and they were kind of pumping up the noise and making it a bigger deal than it was. So I thought that was pretty interesting. I don't know why they would want to do that. I don't see the point, but I guess they were trying to add a little bit more to the story. But yeah, that was pretty interesting to see. I saw that online today. So anyway, I digress.
I'll have to look that up. I feel like usually, like you said, it's the other way around. The home stadium drowning out the away band, which I think is kind of tacky, but if they're going to play the song, then but also Tennessee plays that song a zillion times. So
it's not it shouldn't be common sense. It doesn't take us a rocket scientist to know that 80,000 people plus a huge loudspeaker it's going to be louder than a band. Honestly, it shouldn't take a lot to figure that out, but I guess they wanted to make a story out of it. So so that's what happened.
I'll have to look that up. I did see the funny meme from the South Carolina social media with the the cutting from the banjo playing Rocky Top to Sandstorm. That was funny. That got me. That made me laugh. Funny, but, for me, my player that most stood out to me would be hey, we're SEC kids here. Rocket Sanders down there at Arkansas. He's been unbelievable this year. He had another amazing game in Arkansas's huge huge win over Ole Miss. 230 yards on the ground, I think, and 4 scores. He's had one of the best SEC running back seasons in recent memory. He has an outside shot at 1,600 yards for the year, depending on how he does, in their bowl game, if he plays and all that, and how he does against my boys next week on Black Friday. So we'll see about that. But he's been unbelievable. He really carried that offense in the middle of the season when KJ Jefferson was slumping and injured, and he's been, with Jefferson back and looking at full strength the last couple weeks, just even more running lanes for Rocket Sanders, and he's been incredible and kind of under the radar nationally. So I think SEC fans know, but yeah, he's been amazing.
Yeah, no, he very Warren McFadden-esque last night for Rocket Sanders. That was fun to watch.
Yeah, he's a big guy. All right, hey, let's wrap it up. What's the best thing and the worst thing that you saw in Week 12?
Let's start with the worst. I think we both kind of agree with this. It's Hendon Hooker's injury. You never want to see that. You really don't. It's injuries in itself are terrible. I wish our bodies didn't fail us the way they do sometimes. But it's tough. It's, they're already down. They're already losing by quite a bit at that point. And obviously you're still trying to play 100%. Hendon Hooker wants to play 100%. And then to go down like that, you kind of knew, we're no doctors, but you kind of knew what it was. Those types of injuries, those no contact knee injuries always end up essentially being the same thing, an ACL tear, which ended up being what the case.
Yeah.
This is tough. It's just tough, man. He's had an incredible season. He's had an incredible career, up and down. He finally found a good footing at Tennessee after a few years at Virginia Tech, and his draft stock, it wasn't anywhere, it wasn't the greatest. I mean, he's not up there with CJ Stroud or Bryce Young or Will Levis, which I don't understand. But anyway, it's not up there. And, maybe he, with this performance this year, he had a shot to getting a good, maybe jumping in there, the conversation, getting a late round draft pick and maybe competing or maybe being on a roster next year. And to see that happen to him, it's just tough. It's tough to see. You never want to see that. So, that was the worst thing that I saw. And the best thing is Vanderbilt. Again, Vanderbilt, the Commodores, man. Clark Lee he deserves all the flowers in the world. I said this last week again, and back-to-back SEC wins. I think it's the first time they've beat Florida and Kentucky in the same season since like 1982 or something like that. It was man. Shout out Vanderbilt. I think the foundation is being built, and it's being built very, very strongly. Down there in Tennessee, and Vanderbilt. I'm looking forward to see how they continue to develop and how they continue to build this. I mean, it's not going to be easy. They're not going to go 11-1 next year or anything like that. Sure. But if you can start getting some of these recruited, start winning some of these recruiting battles, and you could look into maybe like a South Carolina type or Missouri type kind of, they've had, Missouri's been to the SEC title game, sooner than Vanderbilt has. And it hasn't been, they kind of were able to build the program in the SEC. Missouri has. And, right. I think hopefully Vanderbilt can get out of the cellar, and there looks like they're well on their way to doing that. And they're a win away from being bowl eligible. They have to play Tennessee, which Tennessee, right. After that emotional loss, you just lost Hendon Hooker, you're kind of out of it at this point. How do the players react? Do they come out and still fight? I don't know. These are college kids who at this point now don't really have that much to play for now at this point. They're not going to make the playoffs. So can Vanderbilt do it again? I'm interested. It'd be very fun to see. Shout out Vanderbilt. That's the best thing I saw this week.
Yeah. Yeah. And Clark Lee's an alum, so he knows what it takes to win there, and it's not like he's just going to go skip town for the first. Exactly,
and those coaches are. I love alums coaching. Their alma maters, because they care a little bit more. And they're not going to be like Lincoln Riley and bolting to the USC. They're not, like you mentioned. Right. They're not going to be like some of these other coaches. They're there to stay. You look at Kirby Smart. What he did at Georgia. as an alum. Steve Spurrier, Bear Bryant, these types of coaches who it means a lot to them. Some coaches end up being legacy coaches like Nick Saban. They're not from there, but they become part of the culture and they build their legacies. But not everybody does that, and good for him. Good for Clark Lee to do that, to come in and try to build his program up. Like I said, we talked about it. I talked about it last week when I said, we kind of made fun of him at the SEC Media Days when he said that Vanderbilt is going to be one of the best programs in the SEC moving, in the future. And we kind of laughed at him like, yeah, whatever. But I mean, the foundation is there. It's strongly there. You beat Kentucky and you beat Florida. That's good for them. For the first time in a while, I saw Vanderbilt, their stadium is filled with Vanderbilt fans. Normally it's a glorified home game for the opponent, but the fans came out and that's what you need. Start getting people excited about Vanderbilt football. And the Commodores are definitely, they're in a good spot right now.
The best thing I saw was Marshall's stud running back, Rasheen Ali. He was one of the nation's leaders in FBS in rushing yards last year. I can't remember if he was number one or if he was just near the top. Trying to blank on that right now. It's on my head, but Rasheen Ali was a stud last year. He had missed all of this season. He had been absent from the team for a little bit. They were kind of coy about why he was sidelined, but some sort of health issue. And he's gotten right, and he made his debut yesterday against Georgia Southern, and Marshall's having a great end of their season. He had 79 yards, so it was just great to see Rasheen Ali back in action. So kind of the other side of that coin of the worst thing I saw, which is Hendon Hooker's season ending prematurely. So just, what a great college player, just incredible last 2 years. He's a Tennessee legend. He's a college football legend for what he started last year and this amazing run that they had been on. And one of the most iconic regular season wins in Tennessee history, in SEC history, that win over Alabama. That was unbelievable. We're gonna remember that for decades. And it does look like, maybe Tennessee, their brightest goals, their absolute zenith, peak of the mountaintop goals of, a playoff and a Heisman are gone now. And that's a bummer, but hey, focus on NFL, focus on the draft prep, but he's going to be with this team for the next couple of weeks. And he's been a great leader there in Knoxville. Just some incredible quotes. And after games, you can really tell the team respects him and rallies around him. And just a guy that everybody roots for. So really a bummer to see his career end on the sidelines and not.
You don't want to see people's careers, and you want your career to end on your own terms. You know what I mean? You really do. And season-ending injuries, almost career-ending injuries, at least college career-ending injuries, are the worst. You don't want to see that. You want to go out on your own terms. And as a college football fan, I want that as well. I want all these guys to go out on their own terms and go out on top and go out happy. And it's just a bummer. It really is. Yeah.
So here at the Transfer Portal, we all are big Hendon Hooker fans and hope he does well and hope we get to watch him on Sundays for a long time. So, but yeah. Our condolences to him. And hey, thanks for tuning in. That's a wrap for us on week 12. A couple big games, but a lot of setup. And week 13 is going to be an amazing week of college football.
One more week. One last week of regular season college football. I can't believe it, man. It's unreal. It's comes and goes like that. It's incredible.
And then we got all the bowls and the playoff and the Heisman and Army Navy and all that great stuff. So stay tuned to the Transfer Portal CFB YouTube. Hey, I'm Keegs.com on YouTube. You can find Brian.
Acuna bat flip. There's no little squiggly over the end.
No tilde on Twitter.
But Acuna bat flip on Twitter.
There you go. Follow us, follow the Transfer Portal CFB. We're going to have some great college football content coming for you in the next few weeks as the season wraps up. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in.
Thanks,